They called me the family failure, but that night when the Fortune editor looked across the dinner table and said, "Wait, aren't you the CEO who revolutionized e-commerce?" everything changed. The restaurant's golden light caught the disbelief in my mother's eyes, the same eyes that had looked at me with such disappointment just moments before. My father's fork paused halfway to his mouth, suspended in that moment when everything you thought you knew gets turned upside down. The gentle clinking of silverware around our private dining room seemed to echo louder than it should have, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Before I share this story with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you're tuning in from. I love hearing how my story reaches people across the world, because what happened that night changed everything I thought I knew about family, success, and what it means to prove yourself. It started like every other family gathering, with me walking into Romano's Steakhouse knowing exactly what role I was expected to play. The reservation was under my brother Marcus's name, of course, because he was the one with the corporate credit card and the corner office downtown. My sister Elena had chosen the restaurant, somewhere expensive enough to make a statement about how well the family was doing. Well, how well most of the family was doing. I pushed through the heavy oak doors, feeling the weight of expectation and disappointment that always seemed to follow me into these gatherings. The hostess led me through the maze of white tablecloths and leather chairs toward the back corner where my family had claimed their usual spot. I could see them from across the room, all dressed in their success uniforms. My father wore his Navy suit, the one he saved for important occasions, with his silver watch catching the light every time he gestured. My mother had chosen her pearl necklace, the one that meant she was making an impression. Marcus sat with his shoulders back, radiating the confidence that came with his promotion to vice president last month. Elena kept checking her phone, probably coordinating something important for her law firm. And then there was me, walking toward them in my jeans and button-down shirt, carrying the invisible weight of being the one who never quite measured up. I had learned long ago that family dinners were performances, and my role was to be the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happened when you didn't follow the traditional path to success. They never said it directly, but it hung in the air like expensive cologne, that mixture of concern and judgment that family members perfect over the years. "There he is," my father said as I approached, his voice carrying that tone I knew so well. It wasn't quite disappointment, but it wasn't pride either. It was the voice of a man who had run out of ways to explain his youngest son to his colleagues. My mother stood to hug me, and I could feel her assessing my appearance, probably calculating how much my outfit cost and whether it met her standards for family representation. "You're late," Elena said without looking up from her phone, her fingers flying across the screen as she typed what was undoubtedly another billable message to a client. She had mastered the art of multitasking disapproval, making you feel inadequate while simultaneously appearing too busy to care. Her wedding ring caught the light as she typed, a reminder of another milestone I had failed to reach in the eyes of my family. Marcus pulled out the chair they had saved. D for me, positioned strategically so I would be facing the window where the city lights twinkled like a constellation of opportunities one had apparently missed. "We already ordered appetizers," he said, settling back into his chair with the satisfaction of someone who had taken charge of the situation. "I got the stuffed mushrooms you like. Figured you might need something filling since you're probably not eating well these days." The comment stung because it was wrapped in care, the kind of backhanded concern that made it impossible to argue without seeming ungrateful. I had learned that my family's love came with footnotes, asterisks that reminded me of all the ways I was falling short of their expectations. They worried about me the way you worry about a relative who can't quite get their life together, with a mixture of affection and exasperation that never quite balanced out. "Thanks," I said, taking my seat and unfolding the cloth napkin across my lap. The gesture felt formal, like I was playing dress-up in someone else's life. Around us, the restaurant hummed with the conversation of successful people celebrating successful things. Business deals closed, promotions earned, Partnerships formed. I could feel my family's embarrassment radiating from them like heat, the unspoken wish that I could contribute something meaningful to these gatherings. My father cleared his throat, the signal that he was about to attempt conversation. So, any luck with the job search this week? The question hung in the air like smoke, clouding everything that followed. He asked it the same way every time, with just enough hope to make the disappointment sharper when I couldn't give him the answer he wanted. I could see my mother's face tighten slightly, preparing herself for another round of making excuses for her youngest son. "I've been working on some projects," I said, which was technically true but would never satisfy their need for concrete answers. In their world, work meant offices and salaries and benefits packages. It meant business cards and LinkedIn profiles and quarterly reviews. My world operated by different rules, but explaining that had become exhausting years ago. I had learned to give them just enough information to end the conversation without lying outright. Elena finally looked up from her phone, her eyes narrowing with the focus she usually reserved for cross-examining witnesses. "Projects," she repeated, turning the word over like evidence in a case she was building. "What kind of projects exactly? Because last month you said you were consulting, and the month before that you were doing freelance work. It's hard to keep track of all these mysterious projects that never seem to lead anywhere." The accusation in her voice was sharp enough to cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. She had always been the prosecutor in the family, the one who demanded evidence and documentation for everything. Her success in law had only amplified this tendency, turning every family conversation into a deposition where I was always the defendant. I could feel the other diners glancing our way, attracted by the tension that was building at our table like a storm front. "Elena," my mother said softly, the way she had when we were children and someone was pushing too hard. But her intervention lacked conviction, as if she too wanted answers, but was too polite to demand them directly. She had perfected the art of disappointed silence, letting her questions hang in the air until they became accusations by omission. Marcus leaned forward, adopting the same posture he used in board meetings when he was about to make a point. "Look, we're not trying to gang up on you here. We're family. We care about you. But it's been 3 years since you graduated, and we still don't really know what you do all day. Mom worries. Dad worries. Hell, I worry. You're talented, you're smart, but talent doesn't pay rent." His words carried the weight of genuine concern mixed with frustration, the combination that made family criticism so much harder to dismiss. I could see the love beneath the judgment, but it was buried under so many layers of expectation and disappointment that it felt more like pressure than support. They wanted me to succeed, but only in ways they could understand and explain to their friends. The appetizers arrived, carried by a server who moved with practiced efficiency around the tension at our table. The stuffed mushrooms looked perfect, arranged on the plate like small works of art. My family began eating with the kind of focused attention that meant the difficult conversation was temporarily suspended, but not abandoned. I could feel them preparing their next questions, loading their concerns like ammunition for the continuation of this familiar battle. My phone buzzed against my leg, a vibration that I felt but couldn't acknowledge without seeming rude. It was probably another message from my assistant about the board meeting next week, or maybe an update from our development team about the latest user acquisition numbers. My real life existed in that phone, in the emails and messages and notifications that connected me to a world my family couldn't see. But explaining that would require explaining everything, and I wasn't ready for that conversation. "You know," my father said, setting down his fork and adopting the tone he used when he was about to offer what he considered wise counsel. "Your Uncle Dave mentioned that his company is hiring. It's entry level, but it's a good company, stable, with room for advancement. I could put in a word if you're interested. Sometimes you have to start at the bottom and work your way up." The offer hung between us like a bridge I was expected to cross, leading back to the safe shore of conventional success. I could see the hope in his eyes, the belief that maybe this time I would accept their help and rejoin the world they understood. It was the same hope that appeared every few months, renewed by their faith that I would eventually come to my senses and choose security over whatever it was they thought I was doing. I appreciate the offer, Dad, but I'm really focused on what I'm working on right now, I said, trying to strike the balance between gratitude and independence that these conversations always required. I could see his face fall slightly, the familiar disappointment settling back into the lines around his eyes. My mother reached over and squeezed his hand, a gesture of support that somehow made me the villain in this scene. Focused on what exactly? Elena pressed, her lawyer instincts refusing to let the vague answer stand. You never talk about your work. You never bring anyone from work to family events. You live in that tiny apartment, you drive that old car, and you dress like you're still in college. If you're so successful at whatever it is you're doing, why does it look like you're barely getting by? Her questions were like scalpels, precise and cutting, designed to expose the contradictions in my story. She wasn't wrong about the external evidence. I had chosen to live simply, to avoid the displays of wealth that would have invited questions I wasn't ready to answer. My apartment was small but comfortable. My car was reliable but unremarkable. My clothes were casual but clean. I had learned that invisibility was sometimes the best protection, especially when you were building something that others might not understand. The restaurant continued its elegant dance around us, servers gliding between tables, wine glasses being filled, quiet conversations punctuated by satisfied laughter. We existed in a bubble of family tension while the rest of the world celebrated their successes openly. I wondered what it would be like to live without the weight of constant explanation, to be able to share victories without having to justify the unconventional path that led to them. My phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. I glanced down quickly and saw a preview of an email from our lead investor. Something about the Fortune interview being confirmed for next week's issue. My heart jumped slightly, knowing that the article would change everything, would make hiding impossible. But that was next week's problem. Tonight, I was still the family disappointment, still playing the role they had written for me. Maybe we should order dinner, my mother suggested, her voice carrying the diplomatic tone she used when family gatherings threatened to become family confrontations. She signaled for the server with the practiced grace of someone who had spent years smoothing over difficult moments. The menu provided a temporary reprieve, a neutral territory where we could discuss preferences instead of life choices. As we debated between steaks and seafood, I noticed a woman at the bar who kept glancing our way. She was well-dressed, professional, with the kind of confident posture that suggested she was comfortable in expensive restaurants. There was something familiar about her, though I couldn't place where I might have seen her before. She seemed to be waiting for someone, checking her watch occasionally while nursing what looked like a glass of wine. The conversation at our table had shifted to safer topics, family friends, and upcoming events, the kind of neutral territory that allowed us to pretend the earlier tension hadn't happened. But I could feel the unresolved questions still hanging in the air, waiting for the right moment to resurface. My family had perfected the art of temporary ceasefires, but they never forgot the wars they were fighting. As the main courses arrived, beautifully plated and steaming hot, I allowed myself to imagine what it would be like to tell them the truth. To explain about the late nights and early mornings, the risks and failures and small victories that had built into something bigger than any of us had imagined. To share the excitement of watching our user base grow, of seeing our technology solve real problems for real people, of building something from nothing in the space between their understanding and my reality. But that conversation would require them to see me differently, to acknowledge that their assumptions about success and failure might be incomplete. It would require admitting that the sun they had written off as directionless had found a direction they simply couldn't see. And I wasn't sure any of us were ready for that kind of fundamental shift in our family dynamics. The woman at the bar was still there, still glancing our way occasionally. She had been joined by another woman, equally professional, and they were engaged in the kind of intense conversation that suggested business rather than pleasure. I found myself wondering what kind of work brought people to expensive restaurants on weeknight evenings, what kind of success looked like when it was lived openly instead of hidden away. As dessert was being discussed and coffee orders were being taken, I realized that this dinner was following the same script as all the others. The disappointment, the concern, the offers of help that felt more like interventions. My family loved me, but they loved the version of me they thought I should become more than the version I actually was. And I had enabled this by choosing silence over explanation, privacy over transparency. The evening was winding down, but I could feel something building, some change in the atmosphere that I couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was the way the woman at the bar kept looking over, or maybe it was the growing certainty that this performance was becoming unsustainable. Either way, I had the strange feeling that this dinner, like all the others before it, was about to become something entirely different. The woman at the bar was definitely watching us now, her conversation with her colleague punctuated by glances that were becoming less subtle by the minute. I tried to focus on my family's discussion about weekend plans, but something about her intense attention was making me increasingly uncomfortable. She had the look of someone trying to solve a puzzle, studying my face with the kind of focus that suggested recognition was just out of reach. What they didn't know, what none of them could have imagined as they sat there planning my intervention into conventional success, was that 3 years ago I had made a choice that would change everything. While they assumed I was failing to launch, I was actually building something in the quiet hours between their expectations and my reality. It started in my bedroom, with nothing but a laptop and an idea that kept me awake at night. An idea so simple and so obvious that I couldn't believe no one else had thought of it. The summer after graduation, while my classmates were celebrating their corporate job offers and my family was wondering why I wasn't following suit, I was coding 18-hour days in my tiny apartment. My fingers moved across the keyboard like they were speaking a language my family had never learned, building bridges between problems and solutions that existed only in the digital space they couldn't see. I lived on coffee and determination, driven by the certainty that I was creating something that mattered. The idea had come to me during my senior year, watching my roommate struggle to find reliable freelance work as a graphic designer. The existing platforms were clunky, expensive, and favored established players over talented newcomers. There had to be a better way to connect creative professionals with clients who needed their skills, a way that was fair, efficient, and accessible to everyone. I spent months researching the market, identifying the gaps that no one else seemed to notice. Those first few months were brutal in ways my family could never understand. While they worried about my lack of direction, I was teaching myself advanced programming languages, studying market analytics, and building relationships with potential users who shared my frustration with the status quo. I was sleeping 4 hours a night and loving every minute of it, driven by the kind of passion that makes sacrifice feel like privilege. The breakthrough came 8 months in, when I finally cracked the algorithm that would become the heart of our platform. It was 2 in the morning, and I was surviving on my third pot of coffee when the code finally compiled without errors. I remember staring at the screen, watching the data flow exactly the way I had envisioned it, and knowing that everything was about to change. I called my college roommate, who had agreed to be my co-founder, and we stayed up until dawn testing and retesting the system. By month 10, we had our first beta users, a small group of designers and writers who were willing to test our platform in exchange for feedback and early access. Their enthusiasm was infectious, confirming what I had suspected all along. We weren't just building software, we were solving a real problem for real people. The testimonials started pouring in, stories of freelancers finding steady work and clients discovering talented professionals they never would have found otherwise. The growth was exponential in a way that even I hadn't anticipated. Within 6 months of our beta launch, we had 10,000 active users. Within a year, we had hit 100,000. The platform was generating revenue, scaling smoothly, and attracting attention from investors who understood what we were building. But I kept all of this hidden from my family, knowing that they wouldn't understand the unconventional path I had chosen. While my parents worried about my empty resume, I was attending board meetings with venture capitalists who saw our potential. While my siblings questioned my financial stability, I was negotiating deals that would fund our expansion into international markets. While they planned interventions to help me find direction, I was providing direction for a team of 40 employees who believed in our mission as much as I did. The hardest part wasn't the work itself, but the isolation that came with living two completely different lives. At family gatherings, I played the role of the struggling graduate while secretly managing a company that was revolutionizing how creative professionals found work. I listened to career advice from relatives who had no idea that I was already living the entrepreneurial dream they thought was too risky to pursue. There were moments when I almost told them, times when the weight of secrecy felt heavier than the fear of their reaction. Like the night we secured our series of funding, when I wanted to celebrate with the people who mattered most to me but knew they wouldn't understand what we were celebrating. Or the morning our user base hit 500,000, when I sat alone in my apartment with champagne I couldn't share and success I couldn't explain. The decision to stay private wasn't just about family dynamics, though. I had watched too many young entrepreneurs become celebrities before their companies were stable, watched promising startups crumble under the weight of premature publicity. I wanted our success to be built on solid foundations, not media hype. I wanted to prove that the business worked before I proved that I was capable of running it. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back to the present moment where my family was still debating dessert options and the woman at the bar was still watching me with increasing intensity. This time the message was from our head of marketing, confirming that the Fortune feature would hit newsstands on Monday. The article was titled, "The Quiet Revolution: How Young CEOs Are Changing Business from Behind the Scenes," and apparently I was the cover story. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family would probably learn about my success from a magazine cover rather than from me directly. For 3 years, I had been the subject of their concern and disappointment, the cautionary tale they told themselves about the importance of traditional career paths. In 4 days, I would be on the cover of the most prestigious business magazine in the world, representing everything they claimed to value about success and achievement. The woman at the bar was definitely Sarah Chan, I realized suddenly, recognizing her from her LinkedIn profile. She was the journalist who had interviewed me for the cover story, the one who had spent 2 hours asking probing questions about our business model and company culture. She was probably here with her editor, maybe discussing final details about the article or planning follow-up coverage. My heart started beating faster as I realized the implications of her presence. If she recognized me here, surrounded by my family, there was no way to maintain the careful separation I had worked so hard to preserve. She knew exactly who I was and what I had accomplished, and she had no reason to keep that information private. The two worlds I had been keeping apart were about to collide in the most public way possible. Sarah was approaching our table now, her colleague following behind with the confident stride of someone accustomed to approaching strangers in restaurants. I could see the recognition dawning in her eyes, the satisfaction of solving the puzzle that had been bothering her since she first noticed me. My family was still engaged in their conversation about coffee versus dessert wine, completely unaware that their evening was about to take a dramatic turn. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice carrying the professional confidence that had made our interview so engaging. "I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner, but aren't you the CEO we featured in our upcoming issue?" The question hung in the air like a revelation, transforming the atmosphere at our table in an instant. My family's conversation stopped mid-sentence, their attention shifting between Sarah and me with the kind of confusion that comes from having your reality suddenly challenged. My father's fork was suspended halfway to his mouth again, this time frozen by surprise rather than disbelief. My mother's hand went to her pearl necklace, an unconscious gesture she made when she was processing unexpected information. Marcus straightened in his chair, his business instincts kicking in as he tried to assess what was happening. Elena's phone finally went face down on the table, her full attention focused on this stranger who seemed to know something about me that they didn't. I think you might have me confused with someone else, I said carefully, though we both knew that wasn't true. Sarah smiled, the kind of smile that journalists give when they know they're onto something interesting. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, scrolling through what I assumed were photos from our interview session. I don't think so, she said, showing me the screen where I could see a preview of the Fortune cover featuring my photograph. You're definitely the same person. I should know. I spent 2 hours interviewing you last month about how you built your platform from nothing into a multi-million-dollar company. The words hit the table like a bomb, exploding the careful fiction I had been maintaining for 3 years. My family's reaction was immediate and intense. My mother's face went through a series of expressions, from confusion to shock to something that might have been pride mixed with hurt. My faith. Er's mouth opened and closed without sound, like he was trying to process information that didn't fit with everything he thought he knew about his youngest son. Marcus leaned forward, his business training taking over as he tried to understand what he was hearing. Multi-million-dollar company. Elena repeated, her prosecutor instincts focusing on the specific claim that seemed most impossible to reconcile with the struggling graduate they thought they knew. What company? What platform? What are you talking about? Her questions came rapid-fire, each one more urgent than the last, as if she could force the truth into existence through sheer interrogation. Sarah looked between my family and me, clearly realizing that she had walked into something more complicated than a simple recognition moment. I'm Sarah Chun from Fortune magazine, she said, introducing herself with the grace of someone accustomed to navigating awkward social situations. We're featuring your son on the cover of our next issue. He's built one of the most innovative freelance platforms in the industry. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with 3 years of assumptions being shattered in real time. I could see my family struggling to reconcile the image of the successful CEO with the son and brother they had been worried about for so long. The cognitive dissonance was written across their faces, confusion mixed with embarrassment mixed with the dawning realization that they had been fundamentally wrong about my life. Freelance forward, I said finally, speaking the name of my company out loud to my family for the first time. That's the platform I built. That's what I've been working on for the past 3 years. The words felt strange in my mouth after so long in hiding, like speaking a foreign language I had forgotten how to pronounce. Marcus was the first to recover, his business background helping him process the information faster than the others. Freelance forward, he repeated slowly, and I could see recognition dawning in his eyes. I've heard of that. Johnson mentioned it in our last board meeting. He said his daughter has been using it for her graphic design work. He said it was revolutionary. The pieces were falling into place now, each revelation adding weight to the truth that was emerging. My platform wasn't just successful. It was successful enough to be mentioned in board meetings at my brother's company, successful enough to warrant a Fortune cover story, successful enough to make my 3 years of secrecy seem both necessary and slightly ridiculous. But how? My mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How is this possible? You live in that tiny apartment. You drive that old car. You never talk about work. You always seem to be struggling. Her questions weren't accusations now. They were genuine confusion from someone trying to reconcile 2 completely different versions of the same person. Because I chose to live that way, I said, finding my voice as the truth finally emerged. Because I wanted to build something real before I built something visible. Because I learned that success doesn't always look the way people expect it to look. The explanation felt inadequate, but it was the beginning of a conversation that was 3 years overdue. Sarah was watching this family drama unfold with the fascination of someone who had stumbled onto a story within a story. The platform has over 2 million active users now, she added, apparently deciding that full disclosure was the only way forward. It's valued at over $50 million, and it's projected to hit $100 million by next year. Your son is exactly the kind of young entrepreneur we love to feature. The numbers hung in the air like evidence in a trial where the verdict was already clear. $50 million. 2 million users. Fortune magazine cover story. The weight of success I had been carrying alone was finally visible to the people who mattered most to me, and their shock was giving way to something that looked like pride mixed with bewilderment. 50 million, my father repeated, his voice carrying the tone of someone trying to make sense of an impossible equation. He had spent his career in traditional business, where success was measured in quarterly reports and annual bonuses, where million-dollar valuations were the stuff of legend rather than family dinner conversation. Elena was staring at me like she was seeing a stranger, her legal mind working to process evidence that contradicted everything she thought she knew about the case. You're telling me that while we've been worried about you finding a job, you've been running a $50 million company? The question was rhetorical, but the disbelief in her voice was real. I'm telling you that I found my own path, I said, feeling the weight of secrecy finally lifting from my shoulders. I'm telling you that success doesn't always look the way we expect it to look, and that sometimes the people we worry about are doing just fine in ways we can't see. The restaurant continued its elegant dance around us, but our table had become the center of a different kind of performance, one where the roles were being rewritten in real time. The son they had thought was failing was actually succeeding beyond their wildest expectations. The career they had thought was non-existent was actually revolutionary. The future they had thought was uncertain was actually secured by achievements they had never imagined possible. Sarah's colleague, who had been quietly observing this family revelation, finally spoke up. "We should probably let you all process this privately," she said with the tact of someone who understood when journalists had accidentally become part of the story they were supposed to be covering. "But I have to say, this is exactly why we wanted to feature companies like yours. The quiet revolutionaries who are changing the world without making noise about it." As they prepared to leave, Sarah handed me her business card, though we both knew we already had each other's contact information. "Call me if you want to discuss any follow-up coverage," she said with a smile that suggested she found this entire situation delightfully unexpected. I have a feeling this story just got a lot more interesting. When they were gone, the four of us sat in silence, processing the earthquake that had just shaken our family dynamic to its foundation. The carefully constructed roles we had been playing for 3 years lay in ruins around the table, and none of us quite knew how to begin rebuilding them. The silence stretched between us like a bridge none of us knew how to cross, each of us lost in our own thoughts about what had just happened. My father was the first to break it, clearing his throat in that familiar way that meant he was preparing to say something important. But when he opened his mouth, no words came out, just the quiet exhalation of someone whose entire understanding of the world had just been rearranged. My mother reached across the table and touched my hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she made contact. "All this time," she whispered, her voice carrying 3 years of worry that was suddenly revealed to be unnecessary. "All this time we thought you were struggling, and you were actually building something incredible." Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, emotion that seemed to be equal parts pride and regret for the assumptions she had made. "I never wanted you to worry," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I needed to prove to myself that it was real before I proved it to anyone else. I needed to know that what I was building could survive on its own merits, not on family expectations or support." The explanation felt both inadequate and completely honest, a glimpse into the isolation I had chosen in service of a larger goal. Marcus was scrolling through his phone now, probably looking up Freelance Forward to see for himself what I had created. "Jesus," he said after a few moments, his voice carrying the awe of someone discovering a hidden world. "The reviews, the user testimonials, the industry recognition. This isn't just successful, it's transformative. You've actually changed how an entire industry operates." He turned his phone tower. My parents, showing them screenshots of articles and reviews that painted a picture of innovation and impact they had never imagined their youngest son capable of achieving. Forbes called it the future of freelance work. TechCrunch said it was the most user-friendly platform they'd ever reviewed. Harvard Business Review wrote a case study about your business model. The evidence was mounting. each new piece of information adding weight to the reality that was still sinking in. I could see my family's perception of me shifting in real time, the disappointment and concern being replaced by something that looked like amazement mixed with a healthy dose of confusion about how they had gotten everything so wrong. Elena was quiet, processing the information with the methodical thoroughness that made her such a good lawyer. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, lacking the prosecutorial edge that had defined our earlier conversation. "Why didn't you trust us with this?" she asked, and I could hear genuine hurt beneath the question. "Why did you let us think you were failing when you were actually succeeding beyond anything we could have imagined?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself countless times over the past 3 years. "Because I needed to succeed on my own terms first," I said, trying to find words that would bridge the gap between my experience and their understanding. "Because I knew that if I told you what I was trying to do, you would have wanted to help, and your help would have come with expectations and advice that might have pulled me away from my vision." The truth was more complicated than that, involving my own insecurities and fears about failure, my need to prove something to myself before I proved it to them. But the essence was accurate. I had needed the freedom to fail privately in order to eventually succeed publicly. Their love and concern, as genuine as it was, would have been another form of pressure that I wasn't ready to handle. "You could have failed just as privately with our support," my father said, his voice carrying the hurt of someone who felt excluded from something important. "We're your family. We love you regardless of whether you succeed or fail. You didn't have to carry this alone." His words were gentle but pointed, highlighting the isolation I had chosen and the pain it had caused them. "I know that now," I said, meaning it completely. But 3 years ago, I was 22 years old with an idea that sounded crazy even to me. I was asking people to trust me with their livelihoods, to believe that I could build something better than what already existed. I needed to trust myself before I could ask anyone else to trust me, even you. The restaurant was beginning to empty around us, other families and couples finishing their meals and heading home to lives that probably involved fewer dramatic revelations than ours had tonight. Our server approached cautiously, clearly sensing the emotional intensity at our table, but professionally committed to offering coffee and dessert options. We waved him away politely, too absorbed in our conversation to think about food. "The Fortune cover," my mother said suddenly, as if the full implications were just hitting her. "You're going to be on the cover of Fortune magazine. Our son is going to be on magazine covers." She said it like she was testing the words, seeing how they felt in her mouth. The pride in her voice was unmistakable now, mixed with wonder at this new reality she was discovering. "Monday morning," I confirmed, pulling out my phone to show them the preview that Sarah had shared. The article talks about quiet entrepreneurs who are changing industries without seeking publicity. Apparently, I'm the poster child for building success behind the scenes. The irony of becoming publicly successful by avoiding publicity wasn't lost on any of us. Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief, a smile creeping across his face as the shock began to give way to genuine excitement. "My little brother is going to be on the cover of Fortune," he said, and I could hear the shift in his voice from concern to pride. "Do you know what this means? Do you understand the level of recognition this represents? Fortune covers are reserved for the most influential business leaders in the world." "I'm starting to understand," I said, though the full magnitude of the achievement was still sinking in for me too. For 3 years, I had been so focused on building and growing and solving problems that I hadn't stopped to appreciate the external recognition that was accumulating around our success. The Fortune feature was forcing me to see my work through other people's eyes, to understand that what felt normal to me looked extraordinary to everyone else. Elena reached for her phone, but this time it wasn't to escape the conversation. "I'm calling David," she said, referring to her husband. "He needs to know that his brother-in-law is apparently a business genius. He's been worried about you too, asking me if there was anything we could do to help you get your career started." She paused, laughing at the absurdity of the situation. "I guess your career is doing just fine without our help." The call was brief but animated, and I could hear David's surprised laughter through the phone as Elena explained what we had just learned. When she hung up, she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen directed at me in years. He says congratulations, and he's sorry for doubting you. He also says he's not surprised, because he always thought you were too smart to be as lost as we assumed you were. My father was looking at me with new eyes, studying my face as if seeing it for the first time. You know what this means, don't you? He said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he was thinking beyond the immediate revelation. This changes everything, not just how we see you, but how we understand success itself. You've shown us that our definitions were too narrow, too conventional. He was right, and I could see the broader implications beginning to dawn on all of them. My success challenged their assumptions about how careers should unfold, about the value of traditional paths versus unconventional ones, about the relationship between visible achievement and actual accomplishment. It was a lesson that extended far beyond our family dynamic. I don't want this to change how we relate to each other, I said, meaning it sincerely. I don't want you to feel like you have to treat me differently because of what I've accomplished. I'm still the same person I was an hour ago, just with fewer secrets. It was important to me that our family relationships be based on love rather than achievement, that success not become another barrier between us. But you're not the same person, my mother said gently. Or rather, you are the same person, but we're seeing you clearly for the first time. We've been looking at you through the lens of our own expectations instead of seeing who you actually are. That has to change, and it should change. Her wisdom, as always, cut straight to the heart of the matter. The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing, the distinctive tone I had assigned to calls from my co-founder and best friend Jake. I glanced at the screen, seeing his name along with a text that said urgent in all caps. This was unusual enough that I felt justified in taking the call despite the family moment we were having. Jake, what's going on? I answered, putting the phone on speaker so my family could hear if they wanted to. His excitement was immediately apparent, his voice carrying the kind of energy that meant something big had happened. Dude, you're not going to believe this, he said, speaking so quickly that his words almost ran together. I just got off the phone with Netflix. They want to do a documentary about Freelance Forward, about how we built it from nothing. They're talking about a multi-part series following young entrepreneurs who are changing industries. They specifically mentioned the Fortune article and how it represents everything they want to highlight. The news hit the table like another revelation, adding another layer to an evening that was already overflowing with surprises. My family's eyes widened as they processed this latest development, the evidence continuing to mount that my success was not just real, but significant enough to attract attention from major media companies. Netflix wants to do a documentary about your company? Elena asked, her voice carrying the same disbelief that had characterized much of the evening. As in, the Netflix that makes documentaries that millions of people watch? She was processing this information like evidence in a case that kept getting bigger and more complex. Apparently, I said, still absorbing Jake's news myself. Jake, can I call you back in an hour? I'm having dinner with my family, and they're just learning about all of this for the first time. The understatement was massive, but it seemed to capture the essential situation we were navigating. Oh man, did you finally tell them? Jake asked, his excitement shifting to sympathy. How are they taking it? Are they freaking out? Do they understand what you've built? His questions came rapid fire, reflecting his own amazement at my family's previous ignorance about our success. They're taking it better than I expected, I said, looking around the table at faces that showed shock giving way to pride and understanding. It's been an interesting evening. Another massive understatement, but one that seemed to cover the complexity of emotions we were all processing. After I hung up, the silence returned, but it was different this time. Instead of the tension that had characterized our earlier conversation, there was a sense of wonder and adjustment as we all tried to figure out how to move forward with this new understanding of who I was and what I had accomplished. A Netflix documentary, my father said slowly, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. Our son is going to be the subject of a Netflix documentary about successful entrepreneurs. I'm going to need time to process all of this." His honesty was refreshing, acknowledging that this revelation required significant mental adjustment for all of them. "We all are," my mother said, her voice gentle but firm. "But I want you to know how proud we are of you. Not just for what you've accomplished, but for how you've handled yourself tonight. You could have been angry with us for doubting you, for not seeing what was right in front of us. Instead, you've been gracious and understanding about our blindness." Her words hit me harder than I expected, touching on fears I hadn't fully acknowledged about how this revelation might change our family dynamic. I had been worried that success might create distance between us, that achievement might become another source of pressure or expectation. Instead, it seemed to be creating space for a more honest and authentic relationship. "I love you all," I said simply, the words carrying the weight of 3 years of hidden truth and the relief of finally being seen for who I actually was. "I love you for worrying about me even when you didn't need to, for caring enough to want to help even when I couldn't accept that help. I love you for being shocked but supportive, for adjusting your understanding instead of defending your assumptions." Marcus raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. "To my little brother, the secret CEO," he said with a grin that showed genuine affection mixed with continued amazement. "To proving that success comes in forms we don't always recognize, and to teaching us that our definitions of failure might need some serious revision." We clinked glasses around the table, water and wine mixing in a celebration that felt both overdue and perfectly timed. The restaurant had nearly emptied around us, but we were in no hurry to leave this moment, this space where our family had been fundamentally changed for the better. As we finally prepared to go, gathering coats and settling the check that Marcus insisted on paying despite my protests, I felt a sense of completeness that had been missing for 3 years. The isolation I had chosen in service of my vision had served its purpose, but it was time to let my family back into my life in a way that honored both my independence and their love. "What happens now?" Elena asked as we walked toward the restaurant's exit. "I mean, with us. How do we go forward knowing what we know? How do we adjust to having a fortune cover CEO in the family?" Her question was practical but also emotional, acknowledging that this revelation required intentional navigation. "We figure it out together," I said, pushing open the heavy oak door and stepping into the cool evening air. "We learn how to support each other without imposing expectations, how to celebrate success without making it the measure of worth, how to be a family that sees each other clearly instead of through the lens of assumption." The parking lot was nearly empty, our cars waiting under the soft glow of street lamps that made everything look slightly magical. We stood there for a moment, reluctant to end an evening that had changed everything, knowing that when we next gathered as a family, we would be different people with a different understanding of who we were to each other. "I'm proud of you," my father said, pulling me into a hug that felt different from all the hugs that had come before. "Not just for what you've built, but for the man you've become while building it. For the integrity and vision and quiet strength that made all of this possible. For choosing your own path and having the courage to walk it alone when necessary." As we said our goodbyes and headed to our respective cars, I felt the weight of secrecy finally lift completely from my shoulders. Monday morning, when the Fortune issue hit newsstands, the world would know what my family had learned tonight. But for now, it was enough that the people who mattered most to me finally saw me clearly, finally understood that the son and brother they had worried about was doing just fine, building something meaningful in the space between their expectations and my reality. The drive home was peaceful, filled with the quiet satisfaction of truth finally told and family relationships finally grounded in reality rather than assumption. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight had given me something I didn't even know I was missing: the ability to be fully myself with the people I loved most, success and all.